Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Airtime with Jordan. I'm your host, Jordan Faso, and on today's episode, which is the 7th episode of this podcast, we will be diving into some of the news around the league, and then we'll be doing a review of the weekend's games, and then finishing off, I'll dive into the Bombers as I promised last week. Another sort of disappointing week for them. I know it was against the league leaders in Sydney, but yeah, not a great week for them again. And then, as always, we'll finish off with the this week's Secret Star Society inductee. So let's get into it. We've got some of the news around the league. So probably first and foremost is Dan Houston has been sent straight to the tribunal after his hit on Isaac Rankin in the showdown on Saturday night. And yeah, as for the hit itself, I think I'd be pretty shocked if it wasn't at least 5 weeks for Dan Houston, unless they show a bit of leniency like they did with Maynard last year and give him the opportunity to potentially play in a grand final if they get there. I think the hit wasn't quite as bad as the Jimmy Webster one early in the year on Jai Simpkin, but it's probably the closest thing I've seen since. So that sort of leads me to believe that it will be about a 5-weeker, or it should be at least, in the eyes of the tribunal. Some other news that I missed last week: Dyson Heppell announced his retirement, so everyone knows, great player for Essendon, but a bit of news on his non-selection on Friday night was made to be a bit of a big deal by John Ralph and stuff at halftime, saying that 20,000 Essendon supporters left the ground in protest. But I don't know. I think that as a supporter, you sort of got to back Brad Scott in. You're trying to win that game, and he picked the best 22, and unfortunately Dyson Heppell wasn't in it. And yeah, I know they play away this week at the Gabba, so it was probably the last chance for a lot of the fans to see him play. But the fact of the matter is, like, he was never guaranteed to play. He wasn't named on the field in the team. He was on the bench, and maybe they could have made him the sub, and in hindsight probably could have, given the result of the game. But he's had a great career, and he's been through some pretty shit eras through the Bombers last sort of 10 years or so. But all the Bombers fans know what he meant to them. So just because he missed out on a farewell game doesn't detract from his career there. So good on you, Dice, and good luck in retirement, mate. And then the other news that I sort of missed last week, recorded early in the week, was the Petracca trade request. So I just wanted to have a little bit of a discussion about that, and just there was a bit of a debate around player contracts and whether players are getting too much power compared to the teams in terms of player movement and things like that, or whether they've got too much leverage, and things like that. But I sort of lean to believe that where the AFL is trying to follow the US model, which started with the introduction of free agency, which is a tool that is completely designed to give players free movement between teams, other than just requesting trades, I guess. But so I don't know if we were leaning into that, like whenever they introduced free agency, like what do you sort of expect in that regard? I think that the fact of the matter is that trade contracts are tradable. It's just because it's a 7 or 8 year deal. In the case of Petracca, it doesn't really change anything. As long as the player wants to leave, they can request a trade even if they're under contract. There's nothing to stop this. And whether the club themselves take that seriously or not and tries to actually find a deal is another thing. But I think like this whole notion that the clubs are disadvantaged by the imbalance of power that the players are perceived to have at the moment is a bit ridiculous. I think that teams are always going to benefit from players moving, whether they want them to or not. But they benefit via a trade. They get value back for that player, or they get value back in free agency compensation picks. So I don't really think my point is, how exactly are teams disadvantaged in this scenario? Just be more proactive in your approach to trading and understand the leverage that you might have. Talk to the player that wants out and map out a plan with that player to maximise their value. The way that this is sort of played out in the public has not been great for Melbourne, I don't think. And if you aren't on good terms with your player, then that's your fault. I don't really feel bad for you, because if you don't have the ability to have a conversation and map out that way to maximise their value, then it's probably your fault to some degree. So I don't really have a problem with it. We watch the sport because of the players. I've no issues with them having more power than the teams. if your team isn't appealing enough to keep those players on those contracts, then that's the team's fault, isn't it? Like, the only players that are signing these massive deals are stars, right? And in most cases, a circumstance change has occurred which makes them want out or to get traded out, like you're seeing with Richmond with Shea Bolton right now. Like, rumours that he wants to get back to WA, and like, yeah, they signed Shea Bolton to a long-term deal in the hope that their success would, continue forever on the back of their premiership years, which, I mean, might have been a bit short-sighted by them. And, they got premierships out of Shea Bolton. Like, he helped them win some of those, and you're gonna suck for the remainder of his prime in all likelihood. So you may as well trade him now and get the picks for him. So where's the issue with that from Richmond's point of view? And Melbourne with Petracca, as I've been sort of speaking about, you again got a premiership out of him. You completely mismanaged his ribs earlier in the year, that situation. There's been a litany of issues off field with, and the club's management of those issues has been quite poor, and now they're declining as a team, and you're trying to hold Christian Petracca hostage when he requested a trade. Quite clearly, that was from him last week with the Tom Morris news that was broken. So, why are you trying to hold him hostage? He doesn't want to be there unless he's trying to strong arm you into getting changes. Otherwise, with the club, I don't really understand why you would. You're on the way down. You would get an absolute haul for Christian Petracca from other clubs, so I don't see what the point is in holding on to him necessarily. I think Melbourne, again, with Clayton Oliver, you agreed to the deal last year or whenever it was, 2 years ago. If you're worried about him and not meeting expectations of those deals, then you should have put in triggers if you're worried about his off-field issues for some of the contracts, and if not, then it's the same as a career-ending injury. It's sort of just stiff shit. Like, his performance has dropped off. I know it's a little bit different in terms of trading, but it just player contracts in general. Like, I struggle to feel bad for clubs when these scenarios come out in the public. They're sort of crying about losing their favourite toy when they're always sort of, getting a new toy in return for it. So whether that's via trade or via the compensation, they're always getting that shiny new toy around the corner. And I don't know what other industry an employer sort of gets the right to refuse a resignation. It just doesn't really happen. So I think it's pretty stupid that the AFL teams should think that it'd be any different. And competitive imbalances occur in all shapes and sizes. It's the name of the game, and to me, maintaining a good culture and players wanting to be there is a part of that. It's a part of the competition in the league. And if you can't meet the requirements of a player, then it's your fault. I think that it's just the cost of doing business. So if you can't, if you can't get there as a team, then that's just on you. There isn't really any downside for these teams at the moment, other than unless you are competing, and a player wants out for whatever reason and you're going to get a draft pick back, obviously then you're not going to be as competitive. But for Melbourne's case, I'm sorry, your era is pretty much over. Them trying to refute the claims that when Petracca refute the claims that he's requested a trade when Petracca hasn't even refuted those claims himself, and saying that he's definitely going to be in blue and red next year, sort of paint yourself into a corner with this sort of thing. And you think they'd probably learn, the Melbourne PR team, after a pretty appalling off-season last year, the way they treated Clayton Oliver. So I think, given their track record, I'm sort of unsure why they would posture the way they have in the last week. And it just seems very weird, and the whole culture is just very much a sweep it under the rug sort of culture that they have there, and that's why he wants to leave by the looks of it. So, or that's why he wants change. So I hope he does leave. I want to see him on a competitive team, and Melbourne fumbled these last few years in terms of how competitive they would be, and probably more so than any team I can recall, given the talent that they have had. So I'm not really worried, and I think that players deserve to have power in negotiations, and that's where we're at right now. Anyway, let's move on to do a bit of a review of the weekend and the weekend's games. So we'll start off with the Essendon Sydney game. I thought that Sydney were just too good in the end. It felt a bit like all game that they were just going to have a short patch where they put the game out of reach, and that's exactly what they did. I think the Swans forward line still worries me a little bit, and they definitely need Papley to come back fully firing, whether that's next week or the first week of the finals. I think that they absolutely need him and Will Hayward to be playing at their best to kick winning scores each week. I know their midfield kicks a lot of goals as well, but what happens when the mids have to do a bit more heavy lifting around the contest in the finals. Like, you sort of need forwards to stand up a bit more in those situations. So be one to watch for them. I thought, Lewis Malikan was great. Definitely a different team when they have him in there. It just gives them the flexibility to play, McCartan and Rampy where they're most effective. And the backline and their mids are looking really, really good. I think Grundy's sort of fallen off. He's been just fine. But the forward line again is sort of the worry for me. But I think that they're definitely building well, and like, I know they had a rough patch for a while, but even with like Luke Parker, I think that they made a conscious effort to build him up perfectly to impact in the finals. Like, in the first half, they didn't even look like they wanted to play him in their midfield. They just played him up forward pretty much the whole time, where he was sort of struggling. And then bang, in the second half, they put him in the middle, and he just sort of tore apart the Bombers. So I think that he's been managed very well this season. I know he a little bit out of his control with the suspension, but in the VFL, but I think they're managing him quite well and priming him for the finals, so it's one to watch. The Gold Coast Melbourne game, Gold Coast just a very unserious team for all the Succession fans out there. Just they were at one point 47-47 tied with Melbourne, and then to get beaten by what was it in the end? It was 117-63 Melbourne's way by the end of it. So just another year, and another year wasted for Gold Coast. And just to, I don't know, people talk about North Melbourne trying to get those experienced sort of players in the door, and with Viney or Cal Ward, that type of player, but I think Gold Coast need that just as much. And Dusty was never going to be the answer for that specific role, but they definitely need something like that, I think. I keyed in quite a bit on the GWS and Freo game after talking a bit about both of those teams last week. So I thought that it was obviously disappointing for Freo's perspectives. They've let that final spot slip out of their control right now, but it wasn't all bad. I thought that GWS are playing great footy at the moment, so I think Freo were quite good in that game still. Against the Giants, like, despite the pressure that the Giants were putting on them, I think at one point that the Giants were, I think it was in the second quarter, they were about 217 was their pressure rating early in the second quarter. But Freo made it it was just quite obvious that they were still trying to play their game plan, and they weren't just going to be pushed back into the Giants forward 50 and tried to made the game, tried to keep playing the game on their terms, I guess, Freo, which I thought was pretty impressive. They didn't want to kick long down the line, so that, sure, they made some mistakes, but they kept the ball moving, and they have a lot of guys who kept wanting to take the game on, specifically Josh Walker through that period off half-back was really good, I thought. He kept trying to push the ball forward, and Corey Wagner, Michael Frederick, Sam Suskowski, and Luke Ryan, all those guys in that second quarter when the pressure was up against them were really good, I thought, even though they probably didn't capitalise enough when they did get momentum themselves. But I thought it was quite good to see that they were still trying to play their game, and they kept handballing until they found the right kick, and a lot of handballing to find the corridor again, where they had options either side then when they were kicking inside their 50. I think that they have some good pressure forwards, Freo as well, but GWS's defence was just so good for most of the game, even when it was on Freo's terms. They've got a lot of composure back there, so despite the good pressure from guys like Bailey Banfield, who provides a lot of that, and I think he specifically really needs to tidy up his disposal. He provides great pressure, as I was just saying, but the skills sort of let him down, and the whole Freo forward line in general were good at pressure, but maybe not the best users of the ball when they do get it. But eventually GWS sort of finally broke through and broke the game open with some of their run and handball through the corridor, and Brent Daniels again was key to that. I think that Freo were doing well, sort of forcing the short kicks into long down the line ones for GWS, and turning it over until forcing turnovers until GWS got that run game going through the corridor. But I think that a big part of that was obviously Brent Daniels, and I thought that Freo probably should have made a move there at some point and slowed him down. I think that Hayden Young was sort of struggling inside. He wasn't impacting the middle like the way he has been, and I noticed that Freo put him forward, and I just don't know if he's maybe that's just a conscious effort to try and get him some forward minutes, but I think like a guy that has been a great defender over the start of his career, they probably could have put him back on Brent Daniels for 10 minutes or so to slow him up. Get Hayden Young a bit more comfortable in the game where he can find the ball, use it, and lock down and have a roll. I think that might have helped him a little bit, and then could have even put him back into the middle and seen if he had a bit more form after that. But I think that Brent Daniels definitely ripped that game apart, along with Jesse Hogan, and Jesse Hogan sort of just continues to dominate, and there's been a bit of conjecture about, what if they are too reliant on him and he doesn't fire, but that doesn't look like that day's going to come very soon. He just continues to fire, and seems pretty sustainable at this point as long as he's healthy. So I think for GWS they have a lot of match winners, and if I had to pick a team to win the whole thing right now, I'd probably be taking them. Collingwood-Brisbane game, I think, more focus on the Brisbane side of things, like Collingwood, obviously. Not a heap from them on their side, apart from, maybe to note Nick Dacos' second quarter, where he definitely showed everyone in the league why the hype should be in fact real. I think that people talk about the orange tsunami of the Giants, but in that second quarter, Nick Dacos was a tsunami all by himself. He just has so much pace and skill, and if he can continue to hit the scoreboard the way he did in that game, then he's going to very quickly become one of the absolute best players in the league if he's not already there. So that's probably, other than just in general, it's probably a little bit too little too late for Collingwood in a failed sort of premiership defence season. They probably should have made it this year, given how close everything was. They just dropped a few too many games, and I think Fly's system sort of failed a little bit for them this year, unfortunately. Obviously, they had a lot of injuries too, but good win over Brisbane. But I think on the Brisbane side of things, it's just hard to see them winning the premiership the way, unless Joe Danaher sort of becomes a bit more of a team player. There was a bit frustrating watching him on the weekend. He's so talented, but just some of the decision making at times, I just watched him torp the ball out of bounds on the full when they had momentum. Again, Charlie Cameron was running into an open 50, had his opponent completely on toast, and Joe Danaher decides to have a few running bounces, and of course he fumbles one and just spews the ball up, and there was an easy goal for Charlie Cameron. Did I say Charlie Curnow before? My bad, Charlie Cameron it was. He was running into goal, and that was just an absolute couple of momentum shifting plays, and it just seems like Joe has a lot of those where he just tries to do something that's an absolute 1 in 1,000 shot of happening, and he's good, he's great, but his bad can be very demoralising at times for Brizzy. So I feel like I trust most of their players apart from him. Just would love him to just really, really buy in and just let that ego just sit on the sideline a bit more. But who knows? Maybe that's what makes him good, is that ego when he plays. But I think the one thing though for Brisbane that came out of the game that I was noticing was Will Ashcroft is just building very nicely as well. I think that I'm very keen to see how he goes into the finals, which he missed out on last year, obviously. But in the last couple of weeks, he's had 29 touches and then 26 touches as well, which were the two highest possession games of the season for him, albeit both in losses. But I think that that's a nice little string that Brisbane can add to their midfield bows, and if he's grabbing around that 25 to 30 touches a game, then it gives him another person to go through there, and it's in good form. Move on to the Port versus Adelaide game. The Port midfield, just way too good in the end. I love watching the showdown. It's probably one of the best rivalries in the game, if not the best right now. But I talked a bit about the Dan Houston hit, which is probably the main talking point from this game. But so I won't drag on about that. But I thought weirdly from that point on, you sort of expect an Adelaide team to sort of step up at that point and sort of take over the game just out of anger and playing for Isaac Rankin a little bit. But it felt like a turning point, I thought, where Adelaide definitely stopped playing the game and they were definitely more interested in fighting for a little bit. Got caught up in the emotion, I thought. Namely Darcy Fogarty. He was completely taken out of the game and he was focused on hurting people, and which I don't mind players throwing their weight around at all, and being forceful out there. But after something that egregious, you just sort of need to focus on the game as well. And I thought that him and he sort of embodied Adelaide after that point, and where they just sort of fell apart a little bit, I thought. And I think that For Adelaide, though, I think like if they can continue to stay healthy, they have a few guys that look ready to rip the league apart coming into next year. Riley Thilthorpe is just a man mountain. I think that he is one absolutely that could be like one of the best forwards in the league. You obviously got Darcy Fogarty as well. Josh Worrell was very impressive again. Mitch Hinge, a bit quieter on the weekend, but he's been very good this year. Geordie Dawson, everyone knows how good he is. And I thought a nice little move by Matthew Nix was, I didn't watch that game last week, but this week I noticed Lockie Murphy was on ball a lot and gave them a bit of a different look, similar in the way that Jake Saligo's helped them out, being a bit quicker around the ball rather than just having like Laird, Dawson and Jake Saligo. So I think that Lockie Murphy was nice, very clean around the ball as well, so that was good with his added some pressure as well, which was good. So one to watch for them. But yeah, just on Josh Rochelle, he just continues to disappoint. He just, for me, he just sort of acts like he's this superstar, with all the interviews and all the hoopla that went on last week, but he just doesn't really back it up with his play, and I don't even really care about like the teeth storyline, whatever he can talk whatever he wants in the media. I don't really care about the celebration either. I thought it was pretty funny, but I just don't really understand where he thinks he is in his career. He sort of came out earlier this year, I think after the loss to Hawthorn, and was saying that him and the coach weren't on the same page around his role and that he wanted to play more midfield time and stuff like that. But as far as I'm concerned, he's not really even contributing to a great level as a small forward. So why would that prompt you to get more midfield time? I think especially this year he's showcased that he has an inability to win the hard ball when it matters, and that is something you absolutely need as a midfielder, coming up against guys who are just hard at it every week. So I think that Josh Rochelle needs to have a big off season, and I think I focused on him a few weeks ago, my disappointment for him and his development. But I think massive off season for him and Adelaide in general too. But another talking point out of this game was Port's sort of makeshift forward line. I've talked about that a little bit on the podcast, been very high on their midfield and their ability to generate winning scores through the midfield, and with those guys' ability to hit the scoreboard as well as, getting enough contributors. But this sort of makeshift forward line that they have, I think that they do have enough guys who can pop up and contribute alongside that great midfield in terms of hitting the scoreboard. But it sort of got me thinking about a bit of a trend that I'm seeing with some of the teams in the 8, and I just sort of want to see where the Premier sort of lands in terms of what type of forward line ends up winning a premiership. So you can see this trend with Sydney, Port and Hawthorn, which maybe just be due to a lack of I don't know, talent in the, not talent, but lack of resources in those areas where they have these sort of half makeshift forward lines where they don't have that typical out and out traditional star key forward or focal point. They have guys who are capable of creating a contest but aren't going to kick the lion's share of your goals compared to some of the other teams like Brisbane, GWS, the Bulldogs, Geelong, who have your Jeremy Camerons and Jesse Hogan's, Jamara Ugelhagen, Sam Darcy, those sort of guys like that Port, Sydney and Hawthorn sort of lack. I'm just sort of interested to see as the finals play out, like what game plan and structure sort of tends to win out. Obviously, all the teams need to have some forward talent, and they all do. I'm not saying that those teams don't have forward talent. Obviously, Sydney have Hayward and Papley, and Hawthorn have Dylan Moore and the Wiz and Ginnivan, and not to say that their key forwards aren't good, but it's just to see, what type of forward line structure really wins out, and whether it is worth sort of prioritising those dynamic mids and building a team around that, and then all your salary cap probably going to them as well. So just a little bit one to watch for the finals and see which teams sort of succeed, and if there's a trend at all between those teams. That's sort of one thing that I thought was kind of cool on the weekend that I noticed. And I think moving on to the other Saturday night game was the Saints Geelong one. I didn't watch this, I was watching the showdown, but just feels a little bit similar to Collingwood, a bit too late for the Saints. I think for Geelong, I'll probably just give them a bit of a mulligan. The Saints are on a little bit of a heater right now, so you'd really want to see Geelong back up next week and really put West Coast to the sword and get a big win down at Cardinia Park to close out the season. For the Doggies and North game, I think the Doggies just handled business. Sam Darcy looked great, and it's probably the best forward prospect they have on their team at the moment. His kicking was locked in, and he looked incredible marking. His marking is genuinely frightening for key defenders. I think at this point is probably going to be what everyone thought Max King could be, taking the ball at the highest point and just having very, very clean hands. Stewie Lowe sort of style for all the old Saints fans out there, but I think that he's looking very good. I think on the north side of things, pretty disappointing that they're still losing like this. It's sort of getting to the point where they're sort of going nowhere quick, very fast. I think that a few of their top liners have been performing well. Much has been made of Tristan Jerry and his potential All Australian selection, and Harry Sheasel, Colby McKercher, those sort of guys. LDU obviously, but it's just the bottom 15 sort of players in their team week to week are very poor. I just don't think that they can afford to have another off season of bringing kids in. It's probably time to get some known quantities in, and obviously they're thinking about doing that with all the Jack Viney talk and things like that. So I think they know where they're at, and they can't really rely on just more draft picks on their side of things. The Hawthorn-Richmond game, I think, again, the Hawks just handle business. They have got a few casualties with Will Day and Jack Scrimshaw, so wait and see what those guys, how they pull up, I guess, and hopefully they're ready for the finals. But for Richmond, they had some nice moments, and I think that they did pretty well, actually, not to get blown out after that first quarter. One of the kids that really caught my eye was Jacob Bauer for them. He looked pretty great. Took 3 or 4 contested marks, can really jump and launch at the contest. So that was, good, nice, promising sign for Richmond in the end. I think that, obviously the draft was going to be massive for Richmond, and hopefully they can hit on a few players, because, the worst place to be in footy is being the team that's on the way down with no real exciting young players to watch grow week in and week out. So hopefully they, hit on a few of them, and the fans can have a bit more fun coming to the footy next year, even if they are losing. But then the last game of the round obviously was West Coast Carlton. There was, on the West Coast side of things, there was this clip doing the rounds on social media of Jamie Cripps and Jack Darling just sort of giving up on pressuring the ball inside their 50 when they were about 3 metres away from it. Just let the Carlton player just easy pick up, and it was just very poor signs from them. And the reality is that they're a massive club that has some clear cultural issues at the moment, and I'm not nowhere near big enough or anything in the industry, but I won't start the Harley back to Victoria drum just yet. But man, this has been going on for 3 years now-ish, and the standards are still being dropped by premiership players as well. It's pretty concerning. I think it's really only a matter of time before the vultures are swirling, and Harley Reid is the plan for a lot of Victorian clubs, I think. And just for the Blues, good on them and Vossi for overcoming all the injuries that they had. It was much discussed during the week, and I think that their game plan effectively would have gone out the window given that their reliance on their stars. And just a huge win, and I think they should hold on to their spot in the 8 now for all the conjecture that they faced last week. So really good road win from Carlton. It was just against West Coast, but I think they actually went into the game as underdogs in the end. So good win, and hopefully they can get all their guys back come finals time. Now, Essendon fans, I promised you a week off last week, and that is what I gave you. But I think, let's just do a bit of a stock take on where they're at and why I'm going to be focusing on them today. So, obviously they had that brutal loss to the Suns after the siren. They had, it felt as though they missed their shots in the last quarter. Like, nobody really wanted to take responsibility and go and win that game for them, and it was a bit contagious. The goal kicking, obviously, they kicked 1 goal 9 to 2 goals straight in the last quarter and lost. So, you'd think you'd come back the next week and, give it a red hot crack. And, obviously they were up against Sydney, so they came up against Sydney on Friday night and just collapsed again. They had all the inside 50s in the first half especially, and just really couldn't capitalise on it. there's really no one to blame but themselves, and I sort of feel pretty bad for their supporters. They've been through a lot, the drug saga and so on and so forth. I think that, well, it's mainly that, and then just the lingering effects of that, isn't it? It's just they've just struggled to show that they're a serious team again, and there's no faith from the fans. Then it's becoming apparent that there's no real belief in the players as well. From the players. So where has this gone wrong besides the sort of mental suffering side of things, which I don't think there's been a team that's been through more dark days in recent history than the Bombers. But I think that the place to start is with Adrian Dodoro and the key issues that he sort of faced and somewhat created as well at the club while he was there. So finally he's stepping away, it looks like, and I think that they finally, I don't know whether it was his decision or the club's, but I think it's been a long-running joke of how they allowed someone like Dodoro to be there so long without anything to sort of show for it. And it's very true, isn't it, the joke? It's just like, well, that long-running joke of just how ridiculous it is that he's been there for that long, and it's probably going to continue, because firing him after round 22, or not firing him but mutually agreeing to go separate ways or whatever in round 22, this close to the draft, off-season period just around the corner, it's just going to add another year of sort of delayed improvement. And unless Matt Rosa has been pulling the strings all year, I feel kind of bad for him, because it's just like you got given the keys right as the race is about to start, so you're just expected to just pull it all together, and hopefully he can, because like the philosophy that they've sort of been following for, well, the last at least 10 years, I guess, or so, is sort of what's dug them into this hole. And I think that it's clearly not going to work if they continue the way that they have been. So definitely puts the group that's taking over the list management sort of side of things under immediate scrutiny. But I guess you haven't got you've got a pretty easy act to follow, right? So Adrian Dodoro started in 1998, and they won the premiership in 2000, but he obviously didn't really build the bulk of that list. So what have they done since? It was like nothing really. It's obviously much has been made. They've won 0 finals during that tenure, which is just a wild stat. There's maybe a little bit of an excuse is the whole drug saga thing, where they were struggling through that period, and you want to keep some stability. So obviously you're not going to get rid of your list manager through that. But it's still 8 years on from when the players couldn't play in 2016, and about 11 years from when the story broke. So I will acknowledge it, but not excuse that period from them. I think the Bombers at large, their biggest issues come from just a lack of top-end talent, and I think Adrian Dodoro is ultimately responsible for that. He clearly has not a great eye for assessing talent. Might be a bit harsh, but it's either that's the case, or we blame a revolving door of coaches that have been at the club over 20 years, and coincidentally all of them have had an inability to get the best out of their players. So I don't know, it's either one or the other, and I think that we can recognise which is more likely, given that there has been different iterations of coaches there. So I think that Dodoro's ability to assess talent around the league was also not a great strong suit, as I'll touch on in a minute. It sort of culminated in the team being made up of a mismatch of players from other teams, and combining that with their poor player development as well from their draftees, it sort of left them with a club that is underwhelming on all fronts pretty consistently over this period. And as for the players brought in from the other clubs, teams who let those guys go, let them walk for a reason. They for the majority of the time anyway, they feel that Essendon value them higher than they do, contractually as well, and the other teams just operate under the assumption, under the assumption, but have the conclusion that the opportunity cost to keep those players isn't worth it based on what Essendon's offering them. So, that being said, all teams recruit from other teams, and all teams try and pry talent away from other clubs. But if you don't have a hit and if you don't have a success rate at doing so, it starts to get stale quite quickly, and you have to overpay to get those players to leave in general. So then all of a sudden you have a lot of cash attached to players that aren't really contributing to any on-field success, which in turn further limits your ability to succeed more and retain players that are actually, maybe homegrown and quite good. So you bring in other clubs' players, in my opinion, to complement what you're building. But it seems as though Essendon have been operating under the assumption that the players that they bring in are going to be the core of their team. So I think now that sort of context is set, I just want to look at the ins and outs over the last few years, which has become a part of their core. So coming in, obviously we had Big Goldstein come in last year, Jake Kelly, Stringer, Jake Gresham, Dylan Shield, Jai Caldwell, Will Setterfield, 2 Meter Pete, Xavier Dersma, Ben Mackay, Sam Wiedemann and Nick Hine. So to me, none of the guys that they brought in, probably apart from Stringer at times and Jai Caldwell this year, and it's just been 1 year for Jai Caldwell, so it's still a bit of a TBC on him, but he's been very good, so I'll give him a tick there for now. But apart from those two guys, none of them have provided really any surplus value. Even Mackay has been quite disappointing after a promising start and a big contract thrown at him. So yeah, I think it seems like a pretty bad strike rate for them on bringing guys in over the last sort of 8-year period or whatever. And no offense to Jake Stringer, who I just said has been one of the surplus value sort of guys for them, but he's just an unreliable player and always has been. So I think that using him as sort of the lightning rod for this, I think that when a team's season always seems to hinge on his productivity, you're never going to be that productive, are you? I think that they're starting to realise that after being at loggerheads with him with his contract negotiations at the moment. He wants 2 years, they want 1 year, so good on him for not just giving into him again after he plays a solid or okay season this year. Hasn't even been that great. So I think that the mature age recruits that they've brought in, that's those guys that I've just spoken about, but which are a bit underwhelming. But the outs are probably the more concerning part in terms of guys they've let go that have been inside the four walls. And I know not all these guys would have stayed or wanted to stay, but it's more just to illustrate the club's inability to retain talent regardless of the specifics of those situations. So just quickly, the guys that they've let go of note over the last few years: Joe Danaher, obviously, Adam Sard, Massimo D'Ambrosio, Conor McKenna, probably less so, just that he went back to Ireland and retired. But and then you had Zerk Thatcher last off season as well, and then a bit of a wait and see on him, but he's playing some good footy for Port in the last few weeks. And then Patrick Voss as well, who's actually looking very good for Freo, but I guess he's just a role player at the end of the day, so all role players probably look better in better teams. But there's, namely those first three though, that I mentioned, Joe Danaher, Adam Sard and Massimo D'Ambrosio, they're probably playing better than every player, or are better than every player on Essendon's list not named Zach Merritt or Jordan Ridley or Andy McGrath. I think that's not a ridiculous thing to say. And I think the things that Essendon fans would do to have those three back on their list right now would be probably unspeakable. And we'll leave that for a minute. We won't go too deeply into that. But I think that the merry-go-round of getting okay players from other clubs in the hope that they capture sort of lightning in a bottle is not a sustainable list management strategy, especially when you're letting this better talent just walk out of the door as well. So maybe good players just don't want to go there, and they can only bring in these sort of just okay players from other clubs. But at some point you have to realize what you're bringing in and what you're letting go, and understand the talent imbalance there, and sort of either decide to build up from the ground and invest in player development 100%, or and just not cease the targeting of the 20th and 30th best players at these positions of guys they brought in, like Setterfield and Dylan Shield and Jake Gresham. They're all just the 20th to 30th best player at their position at times when they brought them in. I just don't think that those guys are shifting the needle necessarily for you, especially when you don't have the core group that you believe in necessarily, and maybe that's their issue, that they believe in the wrong core group. But even for the guys that they have drafted specifically, so when they have gone to the draft and taken some kids, that some of the results are not great. And like even some of the guys, like I'll list out some of the guys and whether I think that the ones that are still on their list, whether they're sort of a tick or still question marks around them or whatever. So I think that's a good way to. So we talked about the guys, the mature age guys that they've brought in and let go. So let's touch on the guys that they have drafted and are still there. So we have Sam Durham, obviously a tick for him, even though taking him was a fluke in a bit of a way as well. The draft had obviously been compromised due to COVID, so that mid-season draft had a fair bit of talent. They still picked him, but I don't necessarily that's took skill or great scouting from Essendon in that regard. I think that. Another one, Andy McGrath, definitely a tick. Can't argue, he's just a good player week in, week out. Nate Caddy, another tick so far, albeit his first season, but yeah, tick so far. Jordan Ridley, definitely a tick as well. His best is obviously close to being an All-Australian, so you can't argue with that. Nick Martin, I've sort of said he's like a tick question mark. Like he plays well at times. They like getting the ball in his hands. He's solid. I just don't know ultimately how good he ends up being. I think Mason Redmond, same sort of thing. Sometimes he's definitely a tick. Sometimes he just goes missing completely. Kyle Langford, again, just sort of a tick, sort of not. Like he's just okay. He's had that breakout year last year and has sort of failed to find that form again this year. Sam Draper, I think he's a pretty polarising player. I think that I'm not a very big believer in him. I think that he's just a bit unconventional and actually not that good. I think that sort of pops off the screen sometimes, and commentators will get excited when he does something. But a lot of the times, it's just unorthodox sort of things that he's doing out there, and I don't think he really understands what's required to perform consistently as a ruckman at AFL level. And putting him forward has been a bit hit or miss in the last couple of weeks as well. So. I think for any NBA fans out there, I would probably liken him to an early career JaVale McGee. I think that's not to say that he won't become a good or reliable player, but he's just so erratic at the moment, and I don't really know if you can trust him fully right now. I think Darcy Parish obviously has been a good servant of the club, steady sort of player, but he's on a pretty sizable contract now after last season. So again, that's just you give him a tick for that, I guess, but it's just overrating your own players is a bit of an issue here as well. I think what's his name? Archie Perkins, the next one. I think there's still question marks about him. Sardis, again, question mark. Guelphy's fine. Not necessarily a difference maker. Not necessarily a tick or a question mark over him yet. Like, it's just, he is what he is. It's okay. Ben Hobbs, question mark. Nick Cox, again, question mark. Shows flashes, but maybe is never going to ever find his actual position. Harry Jones, a little bit the same as Nick Cox. I've just sort of got him as a question mark right now. Laverty, question mark. I just don't know what he does well consistently. Sort of that tweener, backman, not exactly a lockdown, not exactly an interceptor, but just plays whatever role back there. Just another question mark guy. Jai Menzie I do like, but it's still early on him. And then Zach Reid obviously just can't get a run at it as well. So, like all those guys, obviously, like over an 8-year period or so drafting them, and just a lot of those guys have question marks on them still, and some of them obviously at the start of their careers, and will take a bit to figure that out. But there's only a handful that you sort of feel absolutely 100% about. That's not even to mention some of the other players that they drafted at those spots that have just never made any impact and aren't even on the list anymore. So I didn't consider any of those guys here, but. Yeah, I think if you're going down the development path, you absolutely need to have a higher strike rate than the list of those guys that I've just mentioned. So I think that it especially is important because not many will result in becoming elite at their position based on their current trajectory of those guys. So they need to hit on one of these departments. They either need to improve their player development and talent evaluation of the youngsters and under 18s, or they need to improve their decision making on which players they want to bring in and complement their existing talent base. So right now it's just sort of a failure on both fronts, which has sort of led them to this point, which I guess we're at this point now. And Bombers fans might be wondering sort of where do we go from here? So for me, I've sort of mapped out what I think would be a good sort of strategy for them to take. I think that they've got Brad Scott, right? I'm not his absolute biggest fan, but he has shown the ability to be able to squeeze whatever talent he could out of the North Melbourne team and got them to a prelim or two. So I think that he's definitely a solid coach. I wouldn't necessarily put him in like that top 5 coach in the league category, but he's absolutely not the worst coach in the league by any means. So he's stable. And he definitely wants... He sets high standards at his club, so I think that is something that Essendon need, and I think they have their coach. Like, I don't think we're changing that anytime soon. Obviously, depends what happens with Matt Rosa, and now that he's the head of the list management, and what he values and how he wants to build the list, but I don't necessarily think, as Essendon, you're going down the path of doing a full-scale rebuild, hitting the draft every year and like for the next few years. I don't think that's viable. Just because I don't know how the fans wouldn't necessarily take that, even if it may be the best thing in the long term for them. They're obviously trying to win now, and yeah, I just definitely don't think you can afford a full-on rebuild with the list. And yeah, it's a bit. I feel like the fans will probably grow a bit too impatient for that, so it's just not realistic at this time. So I guess let's see how they can get there to get to that winning a final, and I'd suggest that from their perspective they need to focus on ceiling raisers. They have enough okay players who can play a role, I guess, but I guess my point is they haven't really been bold enough or had the assets or allure, I guess, to obtain these sort of players in the past. And I'm not saying they will automatically now be able to do that either, but ideally that's what they should sort of be focusing on. So the philosophy needs to be different to what it has been, and going after these solid, okay, known quantities in the past, like your Dylan Shields, your Devon Smiths, your Xavier Dersmo last year, like that they've got, you know what their floor is, they're solid players, but yeah, there's not necessarily that huge ceiling that they're going to reach where they're going to become like, top 10 player at their position, specifically. So by that token, ironically, I think that Jake Stringer, that move is probably the biggest swing they've taken in the last 20 years or so. And although it hasn't necessarily worked out in terms of getting consistent performances out of him, I think that those are the swings that can get them to winning a final quicker than building safely, which is how I'd sort of describe their list building strategy at the moment. It's just safe, just getting in known quantities and taking guys in the draft that haven't really worked out, which I guess the whole draft isn't really safe. But as for like guys that I think would be untouchable for Essendon, I think that obviously you've got Mackay, who just came in and he's under a huge contract, so that he's not moving anytime soon. I wouldn't necessarily classify him as an untouchable from a talent perspective, but he's not going anywhere, so we'll include him in this exercise. And you got obviously Jordan Ridley's not going anywhere, Zach Merritt's not going anywhere, Sam Derham's not going anywhere. Nate Caddy and Andy McGrath are probably the only absolute untouchable guys that I would say are on their list right now, and you have to be cutthroat about letting some of these guys go that are just okay. I think everyone and everything else should be on the table, including picks. You can you trade a Langford, a Parrish, a Redmond, a Draper or a Nick Martin for some more established players with some higher upside from other clubs. You target some teams that might have some stars that want to be part of success now, that are suffering in teams that are on the sort of the way down at the moment, or you target players that are in vulnerable clubs for salary cap reasons or just general instability. I think that you can sort of be a bit of that vulture and just like really target some high upside players. And obviously I've actually compiled a bit of a list of guys that I would love to see Essendon go after, and obviously this is barring any wishes on those players, or not including their contractual obligations or what they want in life. But so some of these guys that I've said will be contracted, and a conversation would even be had about them. But it's for this exercise, it's just the type of player I think they should be going after. So someone who can either help them immensely now or immensely in the near future is like as a
potential asset that's like, distressed or has some high upside, I guess, as second draft sort of players. So, in Essendon's case, I feel like they generally lack guys of these sort of categories where they either don't have enough star power, they don't have enough guys with high upside swings, they don't have enough elite ball users or scoreboard threats at the moment. So I think that they can probably capitalise on trading two or three of these like solid guys that they have, that they know what they are and maybe aren't going to reach that full potential, like a Kyle Langford or something like that, and sort of capitalise on those guys' value a little bit while it's still there. Whether it's trading like a Langford, Redmond, Nick Martin, etc. for one of these guys in this list. So from Adelaide, maybe you go after a Dan Curtin or a Josh Worrell, help with your back half. And then Richmond, you can go after some of their established stars like Prestia, Lynch, or Vlosten. I would really love there, just to give them some like leadership and stability down back. Josh Gibkiss as well from Richmond is just a high upside sort of swing. Matthew Johnson from Freo. Melbourne, you could absolutely be a vulture here and get in on the Petracca deal. Maybe buy Clayton Oliver at a low cost, do similar to what Melbourne did to Collingwood a few years ago, and say, hey, we'll only take half of his contract, but if you want him off your books, then we'll take half of his contract and you can just get him off the list. Maybe a Jake Lever, a Viney, or a Christian Salem to be an elite ball user for them, which they sort of lack. From Brizzy, maybe Eric Hipwood becomes available with the emergence of Logan Morris, just another like some talent up forward which they're lacking. Kyle Lohmann, speaking of talent up forward, would be a great player for them. Gold Coast, you could prey on some of their young talent that potentially could leave, like Mac Andrews out of contract at the end of next year. Will Powell I really like for them. GWS, if you could get a Josh Kelly, or if you could get Darcy Jones, I don't know. Hawthorn have a few guys that they could use and maybe take some upside swings on. You obviously got Jarman Impey would be good. Blake Hardwick, Josh Ward is out of favour a little bit. Denver Granger Barras. Actually, no, the Josh Ward one I wouldn't bother about it. Denver maybe. Henry Hustwaite is another one who doesn't get a game in the Hawthorn team at the moment. That's got a bit of upside. And Port Adelaide, maybe they get in on the Dan Houston sweepstakes. Keane Farrell, Miles Bergman, Willem Drew, Dylan Williams, just some guys that have some skill and play hard in Drew's case as well. St Kilda, do you take a flyer on Matthias Philippou with high upside swing? West Coast Eagles, maybe you take a Liam Ryan, or from the Doggies, someone like Bailey Smith, obviously, Cody Waitman. Jack McRae would be a good one as well. Bit out of favourite, the Doggies, good ball user. I don't know, just some ideas of guys that I think that they need a bit more of on their team. Just some higher upside guys, or just some star power in general. I think that I sort of fear that Essendon will continue down the same road and go after these players who are easily gettable and they want a big payday and they're like, I want to come to Essendon. Sounds good. Let's sign up and let's finish 10th again. And they ended up overpaying those guys, and it's sort of led them to this point. And a good example of that this off-season of someone who I don't want them to get is Jack Lukosius. Like, he hasn't proven himself in a Gold Coast team, in a middling Gold Coast team. Why would he do any differently at Essendon? He feels very much like this generation's Jack Watts, and I don't think you want to be in the Jack Watts business in 2025 if you're Essendon. So I think I would very much want to be avoiding that. As for the draft strategy as well, if they do decide to go down the path of a full rebuild, I think it's not even a full rebuild, just trying to develop some players for the draft for once. It obviously depends on who you bring in free agency and trade, but I think that they need some better ball users. They just need talent all over the ground right now, so it's entirely dependent on which known quantities they sort of bring in the free agency and trade period. But they need better ball users in the back half to start, and to get the ball out of Mackay's hands especially, it's just an absolute disaster when he touches the ball at the moment and uses it. So if they miss out on a Dan Houston, let's say, in the free agency and trade period, they should absolutely be targeting the best kicks that are coming out of the draft. Even if they are midfielders or forwards that are doing the best becoming the most accurate kicks in the draft you've seen in the last few years. Your Harry Sheasels, who was a forward at the under 18 level, and Nick Dacos as well, obviously a midfielder at the under 18 level, thriving off halfback. So I'd really, really like them to spend some resources in that department. They definitely need some more pace, skill, class in the midfield, however you want to shake it. I think they just need a bit more dynamic play through there. You've got Zach Merritt, obviously, and you've got Sam Durham, who provides a bit of that pace, but Sam Durham's disposal really lets him down. Jai Caldwell is obviously just a run-with player at this stage and can win the hard ball as well, but you want someone with a bit more class on the outside. So again, you miss out on those sort of players in the free agency and trade period, then maybe it's time to package some of those known quantities like a Redmond or a Langford, who aren't necessarily ancient in terms of age, but you don't necessarily need them either in the long term, short term. You package those guys up for some high draft picks and get some top end midfield picks in this year's draft potentially. I think that the one area that's just a disaster for them as well is up forward. It's just a mess right now, apart from Nate Caddy and Stringer when he plays his 5-10 minutes during any game. But anyone in the draft that has upside as a forward, I'd be taking if I were them. Even if they aren't necessarily the best forward immediately, just go for someone who's got that really high upside, whether they're an athletic anomaly, sort of like how Charlie Curnow was in his draft year. He was taken 10th or 11th, I think, in his draft, despite his athletic profile. That's the sort of swing I'd be taking, or a goal sneak sort of freak like a Nick Watson. I believe that Essendon actually have access to the best small forward in this year's draft, so that's a good starting point for them. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's got some crazy hair. If someone can remind me, that'd be great. But yeah, those two guys, and just specifically, never thought to be at the absolute top of the drafts. Maybe less so in Nick Watson's case, but both had this sort of upside X factor to them, whether it was athletically or just with a bit of goal sense. So I think that sort of thing projects more than people would expect in the AFL. I think that outliers generally perform very well. Obviously there's limitations to that. You can't, my fat ass isn't getting a game at AFL level anytime soon, but I think that the outliers in terms of just how players play the game would be good for Essendon to sort of break the trend of what they've been going for the last few years. And as for the rucks, Draper's fine, I guess, but by the same token, you can go and get Riley O'Brien this off-season and just be better immediately. And I think that's probably the easiest position to find someone in. So as long as if you don't have a Gawn or a Brodie Grundy at the peak of his powers, then I don't really think it matters that much. You just saw Hawthorn get Lloyd Meek for nothing a couple of years ago, and not nothing at Jago O'Meara is pretty good, but they're ruckmen are readily available. And right now you're seeing Jordan Sweet dominate for Port Adelaide as well in the last few weeks after they brought in Ivan Soldo to be their ruck of the future. And I think that ruckmen are possibly the most overrated position. So keeping Sam Draper is fine, but I would also want to capitalise if he has any value right now around the league, and there's a team that's quite interested in him, for example. But overall it's not like they're going to start next year from ground zero. I think for Essendon there's a lot of work to do. They have some talent in the building. I just think they need to be a bit more bold in terms of their list management going forward. In terms of adding talent, they need to add that high upside sort of talent a lot more than they have been. And they definitely they can't keep overrating some of their players that they have internally, because I promise you the rest of the footy world doesn't think the same of those players that Essendon do. I don't think Darcy Parish was going to get $900,000 on the open market, for example. And obviously Ben Mackay was on the open market and they had to pay what they had to pay to get him. But I think that, same with Draper. I don't think you can rate those guys as high as you think, because they're just not they're not providing you with the same results that you should based on your evaluation of them. So I think that, realistically the Bombers within 2 years can win some final series. I think they have some pieces in place that they're obviously keepers, and then some pieces that like the club may perceive to be in place, but I just believe that you can throw them away and package them up and bring in some higher level guys. If you're doing 2-for-1 trades, 3-for-1 trades, like I think that by that same token, the guys that they don't trade, like Langfords, Redmonds, Nick Martins, Drapers of the world, they can still be useful players to you if you don't end up trading them. But yeah, I think that it's time to sort of start capitalising and going after some big swings. And I think a couple of as for them, hopefully a couple of those uncertain youngsters that I had question marks over can start to improve. And yeah, hopefully those untouchables that I spoke of as well, you can keep producing at a high level, and then all of a sudden you have the makings of a contender, which is what they want ultimately. So I think for Dons fans, yeah, bit of time to go still, obviously, but I think there's definitely potential here, and they just need to be a bit bolder with their list management strategy and not sit in this sort of safe corner and cycle of bringing in okay players and letting good talented players go because they're disgruntled or whatever. Like, obviously you can't hold them ransom, but figuring out a way to create a culture where people want to stay and people want to improve, and yeah, easier said than done. But good luck to the Bombers, and it'll be next year now. But anyway, let's end today's show with this week's Secret Star Society inductee, and we are back with another halfbacker. This guy is super strong for his size. He's got great pace, efficient skills, going at 81.2% disposal efficiency, which is above average for a backman, and that is Lockie Ash from GWS. So a bit on Lockie Ash. He loves to run and carry the ball, averages 1.4 bounces off halfback, which is elite for a backman. He does a lot of mopping up of ground balls in the back half, so cleaning up spilled balls off from big contests and things like that. He's averaging 3.9 ground ball gets, which is above average for a backman. Generally, either he or Connor Iden will take the opposition's best small forward as well, so he's getting the responsibility each week, which sort of outlines to you how much GWS sort of rate him. I think generally he's just above average across the board as a defender in all of his stats. I ran his stats in my comparison function, and the similarities came out quite interesting. It was Adam Sard, Lawson Humphreys, Will Powell, who, you know what, he could almost make his own appearance on the Secret Star Society, so stay tuned. And then a couple other comparisons were Mason Redmond and Jarman Impey for Lockie Ash. So some good players, good company is in there, that rebounding halfback, and definitely takes his contest each week and opponent very seriously, where I saw that he's only losing 22.2% of his one-on-ones in defence, showing how impressive he is one-on-one at beating his opponent. So there's another Giants star that will only be contributing to their finals run, and yeah, very excited to see how he goes in the finals, because there'll be a few tough jobs if they come up against a Charlie Cameron or a Brian Myers or someone like that. So they'll be the type of players he'll be playing on, and I'm sure he'll do a great job. Yeah, anyway guys, so that's another week, and a bit longer this week, but I wanted to get through some of the games as they all have been a bit more important of late, and yeah, just happy to dig into Essendon finally and sort of have my 2 cents on, maybe 3 cents, it was quite a while, but yeah, 2 cents on what's gone wrong, why it's gone wrong, and where to from here. And yeah, I think that Essendon fans, hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel for you, and yeah, it's not all doom and gloom. But yeah, have a good week guys, and I'll see you next week when we know who's in the finals.